I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Education for Wednesday, June 10th, 2015. The roll call is Ms. Carnell is here, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. John Llewellyn. We do expect two other members. We do not expect Paul Fatterbean tonight. He was not able to make it at the last minute. If I could ask you to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the second and what we hope will be an ongoing series of town meeting form of Board of Ed meetings. It is not a regular meeting because it was not posted with the town clerk in January as is required. So every other meeting that is scheduled after the list goes to the town clerk is automatically called a special meeting per state law. The agenda topic for this meeting is primarily focused on discussion of the draft district improvement plan. But you'll note on the agenda that we also include programs, facilities, and finances of the Fairfield Public Schools. I would ask the public if they would focus on the district improvement plan first, and then if they have questions of a general nature on programs, finances, or facilities, feel free to ask those questions as well, but we'd like to get the maximum comments on the district improvement plan. We welcome Jeff Steele as our moderator. He's a member of the RTM, former moderator of the RTM, and is known to Osborne Hill school parents because of the moderating work that he did last year during its construction, or almost a year and a half ago now. So I think he's up to the task. That allows me as chair to more fully participate in the town meeting forum as well. At the first meeting, we developed at 2 minutes, we'll let the speaker know that they are getting close to the limit of the 3-minute time period, and Jeff will monitor that. At the end, we'll try and keep some time available so that each board member, if they want to make a wrap-up comment, could. Not all board members will, but we'll try and arrange time for that. You should know that this is live TV, and so Fair TV is broadcasting tonight in real time. I think the only other rule that we started with last time that we'll continue with is that we'll rotate who goes first. Last time we started over here, so this time we'll start over there. But after that Board of Ed member speaks first, then it will be just whatever board member wishes to speak in whatever order you raise your hand, and Jeff recognizes you. We're going to go for about 90 minutes, take a temperature check and see where we are with getting through all the questions. We've tried to target about 9:30, but board members are here, and if you wish to stay, then, and the board wishes to stay, then we'll stay a little bit longer so that we can wrap this up. With that said, Mr. Steele, the meeting is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. Again, I just want to introduce myself, Jeff Steele. I'm an RTM member in District 2. I'm actually finishing up my 5th term, be 10 years this November. I was moderator for 3.5 years in the RTM. And so this is sort of old hat for me. And I have developed a very good skill of timing people, and I had to do that through my job. So it's sort of not something I'm terribly proud of, but I do keep, careful watch in terms of time just to keep things flowing. So as Mr. Dwyer mentioned, probably the best way is to, if you have a question, come up and address it within the first 2 minutes. You'll have 3 total. I'll let you know when 2 comes up in case you're commenting and then you finally get to your question. But please don't take anything personally. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just going to give you a quiet reminder of when the time is. And then I think on this side, we're also going to keep each member's response to 3 minutes as well. And then the overall question, we're going to try to wrap everything up within 15 minutes so that in case there are many, many questions and we go past the time limit, we'll have time to address everything. So those are kind of the ground rules and timing I thought would make sense. Does that sound good? Okay. I guess we just open it up to first question from the public then. And please state your name and which mic? are we doing?
Yes,
Up here,
come up
right?
to the table. You're welcome to ask any question. Our focus has been on the,
And one thing I just will mention, are you, you want name and address too when they come up?
we normally ask
Okay.
name and address. but-
One other thing that,
And Jeff, frequently people say, I don't want to give my street address, so they'll say Fairfield or the school they're from,
That's
or the
fine.
neighborhood or something.
okay. The one thing that will be out of order, and I will call you out of order if anything gets personal, if you attack a board member, if you do anything that's personal in nature, you'll be out of order. So I just want you to know that.
All right.
Same thing within board, among board members.
Matt Holtzman, Osborne Hill School District. Actually, today was my son's birthday. I went to Osborne Hill, as I've done every time he's had a birthday. We had to sit at a separate table, the birthday table, away from the students, and that's the only day I can visit him for lunch, is on his birthday. And I know that the board generally doesn't like to micromanage the home office, but I was just wondering if the board could make a policy or something that says parents have the right to visit their children at lunch, and that this whole, I mean, I don't know where it came from exactly, if it was more the security recommendations from the police report. My daughter will be a kindergartner in about 2 years. When my son was in kindergarten, my other son, I got to visit him a lot during lunch, and I got a sense of how he was interacting with his classmates and things like that. And I think, especially for a lot of kindergartners and younger kids, I think it just, especially ones that are, a little homesick or unsure, I think they like seeing their parents at lunch, or at least I think parents should have that option. And I don't know why that is. I just wish the board could make a policy and say that if parents have a right to visit their kids at lunch in Fairfield schools, this, I don't know, especially, I mean, that birthday table is just ridiculous. I mean, I know some people think it might be a small issue, but to me it was, I visited my son once. He was having a little issues with just how he was relating to school. And when I went to visit him at the table, I saw how he was interacting with another student. And instantly, like, a light went off my head, and I could just vision it better. And I wouldn't have had that chance if I hadn't seen him at lunch. I mean, I asked my son how's school, and he's like, "Meh." So, he doesn't tell me anything. So, and I really got to know how he interacted with his other students. And I really wish the board could just, I know you don't like to micromanage, the administrators, but just to say, look, I think to make a policy that parents have the right to visit their kids at lunch, and that it should be more open. I mean, again, I understand with the drop-off tables and all that now, and post Sandy, but again, I like to say I'm not the enemy. I mean, I am trying to be involved with my kids.
You have a minute.
Kids' education, and not just their education, but how they're doing socially, emotionally at school. And I just think not having that, especially in my daughter should have the same chance that I should have the same chance of it her that I did my son, who's now in 4th grade. I don't understand why I won't have that chance. Thanks. Do I get up or do I?
Okay. So, Mr. Patton, you have the option to address that first, if you'd like.
Sure, I will take that option. Door number 1. So did you know there's over 150 data points in the district improvement plan that were, no, okay. I will, hi Matt, how are you doing?
How's it going, Mr. President? Do I stay here or do I go back?
You can stay right there.
I guess the reality is yes, it did start with this school security, which has been going on for several years now. I'm in the same boat as you. I've had my second daughter is graduating 5th grade this year, next week, and the first daughter I got to go and have lunch and be in the school a lot more, and then the second one not so much. I seem to recall just basic conversations with Chief McNamara saying that the less people, or the public, should say, that means parents, that means salesmen, that means everybody, the less people who come into a school, that don't belong there on a daily basis, the safer the school is. It's just nuts and bolts. Most of us didn't really agree with that because not that we didn't agree with that, we didn't like the fact that that was restricting parents. We heard from the PTAs for that whole year, that when everything was kind of locked down, that hey, when are we going to allow to go back in? And there are schools, I have to tell you, that don't even allow lunch. Parents coming in to see their kids for lunch or on birthdays. They're just not allowing anybody in unless you're there for some kind of official school business. I know at North Stratfield, even before the security thing came through, the birthday table was always separate from everybody else.
See, that wasn't the case when my son was like maybe
I
second
know,
grade or
this
earlier.
is whatever, 6,
But-
7,
and it was
8
nice.
years
I
ago.
got to sit with his, not like in Siberia today. It's almost like he's being punished, which seems to me really
I know, and I always
ridiculous.
felt it was weird. Like, can I sit with my kid and their friends? And like, nope, this is the way it is. This is the birthday table, and that's it. And
Well, the board isn't like isn't. This is rule and we can't do anything. I mean, the board could say, all right, this is rule and that's what, I mean, I
could the
understand.
board create a policy that says that? Sure. Due to the recommendations of the police, I don't think that's going to happen in the near future because we're kind of deferring to the police department in terms of how they want to, how they want things to go. The overall decision is the principal of the school. So if the principal wants to make a policy change in how they change that school, and certainly fellow board members, correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I believe those are the two areas where that lies. And if one or both of those
See, my principle
facilities
is,
say, or groups say, you know what, it's okay now, it's better, if the principal wants to give limited visitation and with a special sign-up system, then that principal.
my
has
principal,
that.
he just deferred. He said, oh, that's district policy, blah, blah, blah. He just sort of, and I mean, I understand that, recommendation, they are recommendations. They're not like, the Ten Commandments. Look, I mean, it'd probably be most secure to create a fortress. I mean, I don't like the idea that 6.5 hours a day my kids are in this black box that I have no idea, they go in and they come out the other end, 6.5 hours later. That's not really what I want to have happen. I mean, I want a vision, what he's doing in his room. What's his room look like? I sort of want to know these things. I mean, just to have a better idea. And again, I understand security, but I just think, I don't, again, I'm not the enemy, and I think honestly, I think it's convenient. I think that administrators like control. I think it just makes their job a little easier not to have to worry about parents and all that coming in. And I just think, I think what's lost is a hell of a lot more than what's gained. I mean,
We're going to go to, that's 3. We're going to go to Ms. Cornell.
Or anybody that wants to go in any
Okay, that's
order.
right,
No,
that's
I-
right. We are going any order, you're right.
Ms. Carnell
You got your
may
hand
want
up
to go
first.
next, but
For the students, it's security first and foremost. But I don't even think, I wouldn't even vote for a policy like that. Because what about the kid whose parent can't come in during the day, who works or who travels, or has another child to take care of? How is that kid going to feel if a parent comes in twice a week?
some
That's,
parents volunteer and some don't. I mean, that's true with with Valentine's Day and stuff like that.
That's
We had a
right.
class trip, and I visited.
do you mind, I've listened to you, do you mind? You're 100% correct, and that was what I was going to say. We get to volunteer, we get to go see their classroom when we have open school night, when we go see the teachers. You can make an appointment anytime you want and see a teacher to see their classroom. But I think it's really unfair to kids that parents can't come up. Because what if you couldn't come up and somebody else's parent came up all the time? And I think the other thing is, you said sometimes your son or some of the kids would have a hard time. It's a lot harder for a parent to leave and kid feeling when it's a hard time. They're going to be a lot more independent.
Well, shouldn't that be up to the parent to determine that?
Well, no, then you'll have pure chaos in the schools. So,
Well, again,
yeah,
it-
well,
they-
he doesn't let me finish. So,
I'm
okay,
sorry, I'm just
Yeah, let's
So I would
have,
suggest that what we did last time was we did allow a follow-up question once everybody spoke to the
Okay.
issue.
Okay.
Rather than a back and
yeah,
forth dialogue
I
with
think
each board
otherwise
member.
it's going to go endlessly. Yes, I agree.
I'm done.
You're done, okay. Does anyone else want to address this? Mr. Convertito.
I mean, quite so many things have changed. I mean, it's not just post-Sandy Hook. But you have to take it from the point of view that, I mean, we have schools anywhere from 380 to, 500 students at the elementary level. If every parent wanted to come in and see their kid at lunchtime, it's not a manageable situation. So what do? A lottery? You can come in this day. So those issues aside, okay, and I'm, I only know you from being at Board of Ed meetings. I don't know you personally. Somebody may not want you sitting next to their child at lunchtime at the table, okay, as a parent. They don't know you. They don't know who you are. So there's a lot of security issues around that. And, if you're going to volunteer in a school, you have to fill out a form. There has to be a background check. Schools are not there for parents to come in and out of, as they wish. And that's my position on that.
Just briefly, I certainly agree with the premise of what you're saying, that something has been lost by this new world order with regard to security. I completely agree with you. I used to, when the brief span of time when I wasn't working, I enjoyed going in. I thought it was it was extremely valuable to watch my child interact with other students. That said, I think that, certainly the board could run the danger of being condemned as irresponsible should something ever happen. If we were to say we had a police recommendation, for these reasons, and that we are going to, ignore this recommendation. It's truly one of those, there's a loss no matter which way we would end up going with it. I completely agree with you that it is a loss. But there's a lot on the other, balancing that on the ledger, and no matter what, no one's going to be happy about it. So, except a principal perhaps who feels a little bit more secure in his or her building. But I agree with you. I think it's a fair point.
Any other comments from members? You're welcome to have a follow-up if you want.
No, I mean, again, sort of what more I'm hearing is it's just, that it's too much hassle to let, again, I don't see what, obviously I know Sandy Hook happened, but, all the managing, I'm in Osborne Hill, which is 500-something kids, but I managed it before that I was able to go in, visit my son at lunch, and no one ever said anything, and I think it was a lot has been lost. Not just, I don't think just with lunch, I just think there's this general feeling that the schools are black boxes, that we don't like to ask questions, parents are considered an annoyance or a bother, and I think all policies should be district-wide. I mean, I don't think whether I get to visit my kid here or there should be, because the principal, I mean, yes, it's his school, but, I mean, you don't want to be rooting for, I wish you had this principal. I mean, I think policies should be a little more, general than that. But I just think a lot has been lost. I mean, I understand security, but I think that's just, and again, there's security, how does I think it's good for the emotional well-being of kids to, if they know that, if parents feel that they think their kid would benefit by them visiting, which was not out of the realm 2-3 years ago. I don't, probably for 50 years before that. I don't know, 2015 isn't that different than 2012 or whatever. Besides, I mean, obviously Sandy Hook happened, but, my child probably has the same emotional needs that my son had, or my child is coming up, I mean.
Thanks.
That's
Okay.
it. All right, thanks.
But what we're going to do follow-up for like a minute after, just so we keep it time. Thank you. No, that's fine. Thanks.
Good evening. Dr. Jerry Crolian, 246 Old Spring Road, Fairfield, Connecticut. First of all, I'd like to commend whoever wrote this. I'd certainly like to use it in my graduate studies classes at Sacred Heart, but I do have some questions. I'm having some difficulty understanding page 38, the student performance indicators. Two-part question. Is the iReady math program the program that is presently within the schools? Is that what we're presently using in the elementary schools, the iReady? Could you explain to me what I certainly understand the percentage at above grade level. I don't understand FR.
That's free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
It's measuring the subgroup of free and reduced lunch as compared to the total population. So the FR is on various indices, and that's what FR stands for.
Then my second part of my question is, I applaud the use of the words every student and individualization and differentiation. But from my view of the math program as I see it specifically through my grandnieces and nephews, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that on day one in a school, all students in a specific grade level are on the same lesson. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Anybody? Donna, you want to start?
Do you want to?
Go to school here, but I assume day one, every kid walks into a classroom.
No, that's what I'm not asking. On day one, lesson one. On day two, lesson two. On day three,
I can't answer
lesson
that.
three.
Would anyone else like to address that? Mr. Llewellyn?
From my experience, having twins in the same grade, that is not the case.
Okay. All right, my
Are
question.
those all your questions?
Yep, that's
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Does anyone want to address, did you get the first one on the iReady math program? Anyone want to?
The only comment I would make is that the school district has attempted over the last 3 or 4 years specifically to have more consistency in lesson plans and how they're implemented, but at the same time, they respect that individual teachers deal with individual classes, and it may take a little bit longer to get through one lesson, a little bit less with another lesson, and I think they more measure at the end of the semester, are they where they're supposed to be.
Following up on that, as a teacher, it's, when someone asks you, what do you teach? It's one of the stories that we tell is that, oftentimes people expect you to answer, well, I teach English. And no, you teach children. And so the idea of the individualization, I think back to elementary school, all it would take would be on a day that one teacher has art for an hour and another teacher has music for a half an hour. Well, that half hour is coming from somewhere. The fact that they're not hitting everything at the same pace, I not only think would be appropriate to the types of schedules that the teachers keep, I think it would be appropriate to the individualization. I don't want our teachers to be robots. I would deplore that notion. I know as a high school teacher, the more someone starts trying to put me into a cookie cutter mold and make all of us the same, they're taking away the individual gifts that we as teachers bring to the classroom as well. So while we have absolutely, continued to strive for the horizontal and the vertical alignment, as Mr. Dwyer alluded to, which I think also is important, I would hate to take away that individuality and make this such a robotic measure. I think that's poor education.
Anyone else like to comment? Okay. Jerry, did you have a follow-up question at all? Or?
Unfortunately, that's not what I'm hearing from teachers, and I'll just leave it at that. I've talked to teachers.
And Jerry, for the benefit of our Fair TV audience,
You have to
if
come
you're
up
not
front.
at the microphone and the table, you're a distant voice in the audience.
Having taught for a long time and continuing to teach, that is not the feedback I'm getting from especially elementary school teachers, that given a slow group of students, there's great pressure on the part of the administrator to move them along. And while I, with you, believe that we should teach at a rate to move students appropriately, I'm disturbed to hear that there's a pressure that people should be in the same place at the end of the week. And we all know that all of our children are individuals and they're all different, and the school should address those policies. So I guess the main question is how do we keep that uppermost in our minds and not think, well, we all should be at the end of Unit 5 by such and such a date. So we are agreeing with each other, but it doesn't seem to agree with policy that I've seen,
Any comments?
without specific schools or names being mentioned.
No, of course.
Well,
One of the things, I've noticed in the past is that you do have different groups moving at different paces. And, people need to be able to move at their own pace, and teachers need to be able to move at their own pace. But what can happen, and I'm not sure how we find the balance to this, is that one group can get to the end of the school year and be significantly behind other groups. And it becomes more of an issue as you move up or shouldn't say more of an issue, it becomes more noticeable when, you get to the end of an algebra course and you haven't made it through that material. You may not notice the next year in geometry, but you sure do notice in algebra too. So, one of the things that could occur is we could go back to adding some levels back into our teaching such that the teachers can move at a pace that's adequate for the children rather than trying to move at a pace that really doesn't benefit probably anyone in the class. It may benefit a few folks, but you've got people who are moving too slowly and people who are moving too quickly. So to restore those levels to the classroom, I think, is a way that we can achieve both the ability of teachers to have their own dynamic way of teaching, yet move the kids at a pace at which they're going to be entertained and enriched.
But is that currently the case?
That is not the case.
That's what I thought.
Anyone else? Mr. Patton?
I guess I'll agree and disagree with some things that Mr. Llewellyn said. Whether it's currently the case or not the case, I don't believe it's the case all the time. In the last, say, 3 years, even before I was on the board, I have distinct memories of having conversations with mostly middle and high school teachers, science and math, for example, where one science teacher had told me, to your point, I said, what do you do if you're teaching a lesson in science and you need a specific level of math to do whatever you're doing, and some kids either haven't had that math yet or didn't quite get that, or maybe they're a little behind in that. And at least this particular science teacher, who in my opinion is probably one of our better ones, said, I stop the class, and if enough of the students are in the same boat, he will literally try and take the time for a period, half a period, as little as he can, to try and bring that home and together and get things, back on track. And better teachers, I think have control and can do that. I think the new high school schedule next year is going to allow for a lot greater flexibility with that, because instead of you rushing through the beginning part of a class, 30 minutes of teaching, and then 5 minutes of here's your homework and whatever, you're now going to have roughly 90 minutes, and you'll have a little bit of that introduction in the beginning and then the homework at the end, but you'll have a giant block of concentrated learning. And that's not to say that's going to be a straight lecture, but for math, it'll be more like a college class where things will be more concentrated, and they'll be able to gauge and pace those types of lessons better. Just quickly, another example was an English teacher comes to mind in terms of the leveling that Mr. Llewellyn was saying. And she has taught in this school system for almost 20 years and taught when we had multiple levels and where we have it the way now. And she basically sees, I wouldn't say no difference, but she feels, well, it can be more challenging the way it is now. She feels it's more rewarding for the students on the polar ends as opposed to the middle and separating them all.
While I appreciate the individual stances, I've always relied on research, and I've asked a question specifically about math, which has been problematic in the community before. Math is sequential, and it is spiral. And I specifically addressed elementary schools because I think that is a crucial base for our students. And I'm just very concerned. The document is great. I'm no problem with the document, but I am concerned with teaching to the middle or slowing some kids down, moving some slower kids ahead. I think it's crucial to a sound math program, and this disturbs me.
Thank you.
End of question. And comment.
Do you want to come up and ask a question?
Yeah, not a question,
Okay.
but I just wanted to add.
Could you state your name, please?
Dawn Llewellyn, because for years, I've looked at two schools, Dwight and Burr, and they teach math a little differently, best practices, where they pre-assess students based on chapters, and then based on that pre-assessment, they could group them. And then one group would go with teacher A, another group would go with teacher B, and then teacher C, and that would rotate depending on the chapter or the subjects being taught. And it actually works really well because I have twins and I've seen the difference. I have a son who is really gifted in math, and for years he would be teaching other students in the classroom because he already knew the material. And his twin sister wasn't as good as in math. She was good, but she would have benefited from being grouped with students who were at her ability to work at her pace. And I don't understand for about 7 or 8 years why this district refuses to acknowledge best practices in these 2 elementary schools. It works. There are studies that show it works, and it works for all learners. And it's a pre-assessment, and then you have an assessment at the end. Kids get together and they work together. So the question is, why isn't it going on? Why isn't there equity across this district? I've been at this mic for years now asking for it. And I will ask this board again and probably get no answers once again. And then I look at Greenwich. Greenwich in the middle school now is working at advanced placement for science, math, and English. So if they can do it and they start looking at the students in 5th grade, why aren't we? That's 20% of our population, that's the advanced learners. Why, when I look at the district plan, we're looking at free and reduced lunch, which is important, but what percent is that? Because I watched one of these board meetings, and when I think it was Mrs. McCormick asked, Mrs. Park couldn't answer that question, nor could Mr. Dwyer. But if that's the focus of this plan for free and reduced lunch, then why don't we know that percent? And I believe it's under 10%, whereas Annika Tired at one of these board meetings, I think
You
a
have
few
1
years
minute.
ago, said that 20% of our students are advanced learners in the middle school, but yet I don't see the metrics in this plan for those students. So, thank you.
Board members, so we're going to go back here to Mrs. Lou McCormick first, if you'd like to address it.
So on that topic, I asked the same questions. I've investigated schools personally to understand the differences, and to me, the statements just made were absolutely correct. I have seen students that are struggling in the classes that just kind of get swept along with the tide. They just keep moving on, whether they get it or not, they're moving on. And I've seen kids who have been very, very bored, literally bored all year in class. And they also are along that same spectrum. And then there are the kids that it's just right for. But the problem is that, okay, we've got some kids that it's just right for, and we've got a lot of kids where it's not just right for. And so given the size of our district should be a competitive advantage for us. The fact that we have so many kids, we should actually be able to create more differentiation and more levels because there are more kids of a similar level. So in a small district, you may only have, 3 really super gifted kids, but in a district like ours, we probably have 30, 40, maybe 50. And you know what? We probably have another 50 right next to them, and another 50 and 50. We could probably create a huge amount of differentiation within this district if we decided we wanted to go along that route. This is a kind of a theological pedagogy as to whether you believe you want to teach via levels or whether you want to have everybody in what they call inclusive. The word inclusive is lovely, except that inclusive can be taken with many different connotations when it comes to teaching and learning for individual students. And so I actually have advocated for quite a while with administration to take up the conversation of let's reconsider how we approach leveling. Nobody wants to have levels where kids are suddenly locked in and they suffer and they're locked into particular grouping and they can't break out. That, I agree, is something that's not advantageous to anyone. But why don't we create multiple levels and allow flexible movement, flexible movement in and movement out so that it's not looked at negatively from anyone because it is free. And we do it not just once a year, but maybe allow a mid-year review because it can be that a kid doesn't do well on a test. That happens.
You have 30 seconds.
Sure. And so then they don't get into a higher level. But if over the course of the year they show that they can, then you can move up. Similarly, if they got in, but it's too challenging, they should feel free to move down. And that flexibility, I think, is key, plus the ability to truly differentiate in an efficient manner, which helps both the student as well as the teachers focus on kids more specifically and their abilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll open it up. First hands get first dibs.
Some of you have asked me this question before, and so I'll give the same answer only for myself. It is a valid argument. I have no doubt that there's a valid argument about the issue of leveling. That is an instructional methodology. I consider that to be the responsibility of our credentialed professional teaching staff and their leader, Dr. Title. I don't believe it's the board's purview to tell teachers how to teach and how to organize their classes. And so I agree it's a valid discussion. I believe that's a discussion that takes place within the central office and the various teachers and principals that lead this district.
Anybody else among members? Ms. Cornell?
Thank you. I think to just maybe add to what Mr. Dwyer said, there's certain things that I think the public thinks the board has jurisdiction or input, to the administration. There's probably more things we don't have input or can work with the administration on for many reasons. So I agree with you. I think there should be leveling. I'm living with a personal situation where I think there should be leveling. But as Mr. Dwyer said, the board doesn't have that right. It's
Hold on. We're not going to do that. We're going to finish here. When we're done, then you can ask one more follow-up. Are you?
It seems I get interrupted a lot tonight.
Keep going. Yeah, please, let's not interrupt the members.
No, I'm just saying that I agree with you. I'd love to see leveling brought back, but unfortunately, as a board, we don't have that jurisdiction.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree with Ms. Cornell and Phil, Mr. Dwyer, because what I heard Mr. Dwyer say was that's up to the teaching staff and the administrators. From all the teaching staff I've spoken to, they are in conflict with what is going on with the administrators. They believe that levelings will help them instruct because they'll be able to move at a pace that is correct for that subgroup of children. And in terms of the board's purview, I think that we're talking about such a high-level issue here that it should be part of the board's purview. The board should have an input. And if the board doesn't want to have an input, I actually think that that's problematic. We're presented what this district defines as a curriculum, which really aren't curriculum. We're being presented the standards. We're not being presented teaching methodologies. I can't say I had a vote for a teaching methodology like CPM that came in. Why? It didn't work. It was proven not to work in every test that was done, yet we implemented it. We need to have more say as to what our curriculum is and how it's delivered.
Before you respond, Mr. Patton.
I'll respectfully disagree with my colleague there, but I want to make a quick reference. I will certainly not speak for the superintendent, but I'll reference a conversation that I had with him approximately about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I asked these very same questions because the leveling idea comes around a lot. And I was given some research and shown other websites and avenues from other towns to go through. And the bottom line is, he was like, we can do whichever way, a board would want or the administration kind of decides or the teachers decide. But the bottom line is over a 20-year period, let's say, 20, 25 years, this district and other districts flip-flop back and forth between was it commingled? What were we calling the how we have it now? Anyways, the way we have it now versus more leveling. And districts flip-flop back and forth about every 15 years or so. And there really was no hardcore research that said that one way was absolutely better than the other way. It's almost a matter of personal preference in administration and teaching staff. So until there is, hardcore, irrefutable evidence, it's no reason to turn the Titanic when you don't have to.
Before, I want to make sure just everyone gets to speak once, and then we can go back to second comments. Anybody else on this issue? Ms. Cornell.
Just don't interrupt me. So, just there's two things I'd like to address. Mr. Llewellyn, I didn't say that I don't want to be involved. I'm saying this board hasn't been involved. I very much would like to be involved. And to you, Mr. Patton, I personally think that leveling is so important because no two kids, to your point, when two kids start in kindergarten, one may go left and one may go right. There is no way that the school can teach to every kid the same way. Some kids are tall, some kids are short, some kids learn by hearing, some kids learn by seeing. And if we don't work more individually with the kids as opposed to grouping them, I think the kids are suffering. So we've never seen stats. The board has not been presented stats. But I look at just kids. I don't need stats to say that kids learn differently. You have children, I have children. I think almost everybody on the board has children. Even Mr. Llewellyn said his twins are different. So I think kids need to be taught the way they're going to respond the best.
Okay, Ms. Lou McCormick.
And back on the topic of this is a decision for the administration and for the teachers to make, well, in fact, as we go back to what Mr. Patton and Mr. Llewellyn pointed out, this, in fact, could be a board issue should the majority of the board choose to make it an issue that was of the high enough level, which I think it is, that affects all the students. And therefore, it is a matter of who the individuals are who are on the board who decide whether we want to make this a district level or not. When it comes to teachers, I would point out to the fact that I get very hung up on textbooks because they're very tangible to me. So I go to textbook review sessions. I actually read the textbooks myself and say, if I was a student, does this help me or does it not? That's how I make my decisions. I don't need some great research. I can assess myself whether I think it's a valuable text for a student or not. However, at that, as I'm arguing which text should be used and not, the teachers came up to me and said, forget about the textbooks for a second, please. All we want are our levels back. If we can have our levels back, we can make things so much better. Can you please just return the levels? At which point, I said, well, I understand, because I was new to the board, that this is a financial issue to change the way we do things back. And they looked at me very puzzled and said, how can that be? Because all the teachers that were here before when we had leveling are still here. All we have to do is flip it back. And I said to myself, that makes sense. But I could tell that they did not receive approval within the greater confines of the district, which means that there is some debate on this topic. Again, this goes back to pedagogy, and I don't want it to be the impression that, in fact, this is a unanimous decision amongst the individuals within this district, nor is it a unanimous decision of people within the nation. This in fact, has been debated for many, many years, but I have to say, upon viewing it, and given the population that we have in Fairfield, we do not have a homogeneous population in Fairfield. As much as we'd like to think we do, we don't. In a homogeneous population, I actually believe the inclusive, all-in-one level can possibly work. Why? Because they're almost already leveled. However, if you've got a really diverse population, I really think that the levels can be very beneficial.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, thanks. And therefore, I would say, in conclusion, that this again comes back to the people that we vote into the seats, what their views are, what is it that we want for this town. And it's very much up to people like you to come and express your opinions, because at the end of the day, what the people want is what will ultimately happen in this town. We just need to be vocal about it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to let Mrs. Maxon Kennelly speak, and then we're ending this question because we're nearing 15 minutes, so we want to move on. Last point.
The thought of a board telling a teacher how to teach because you read an article is horrifying. And I will say that, Mrs. Lou McCormick, if you'll go back to your first 3-minute response to this question, to say that you were a whirlwind of contradiction is precisely why you shouldn't, why the board, not you, why the board, which are amateurs in education, should not be dictating these directions. That is not, I'm not saying at all that we shouldn't, that perhaps we might not want to take a look at a firmer hand or more input or more meetings with Dr. Title and expressing these views and going through this research. But in fact, the research is not definitive on this. One personal story, Greenwich was just going through this, very controversial issue of a certain course to be added to the curriculum, and one of our recent graduates at Harvard now wrote to the board to express passionately, do not institute another level. Do not do this. It is bad education, and detailed at length what he had gained from the course he had been in that was not leveled. And I'm not saying that to refute your point about leveling at all. I'm saying it to make you aware that it is in fact more complicated than what you're saying, and that exactly the thought that, and I will say it again, that amateurs in education should therefore now be dictating how a teacher should be teaching. Maybe, I wish we could find a way to have stronger input on that, or something more than what we have, perhaps. But I'm also doing that from the perspective of a teacher, and when we go over the budget and I hear certain people who have been in business, I respect their view and I will want to hear them speak before I speak first. But on the topic of education, picturing some of the things that everyone at this board has said at some point in time, I promise you inside, I'm just shaking my head saying, you have no idea what you're talking about. I can't be more blunt than that. I've been in the classroom, and for example, at this table it was just said, well, we could start with these levels and then do this and then switch it around halfway through the year. You've just described an educational chaos nightmare. And I don't think there is any research that would substantiate that as a valid way of addressing education for children. And keeping in mind that the
30
mission
seconds.
and goals that we just supported are involving the whole child. And there's a lot to be addressed in the whole child, which is not solely about the metric on a test score. And I think for the board to so enthusiastically, certain members go after the notion of we want to be in charge of that and put our stamp on it, I think there's some meetings that you perhaps could have first.
Okay, that's time.
Could I just say one thing?
Can you just please, yeah, we get
Before you speak, Ms.
1 minute
Llewellyn.
wrap up, done.
Point of order. I'm sorry, Mrs. Llewellyn is not a board of education member.
I'm not having a conversation.
Wait, I'm sorry, hold on.
We do have-
Everyone, this is what we're
Everyone's
doing,
allowed
and
to
I'm going to even change it as we
Can I make a
speak.
comment first?
We're allowing one follow-up comment or question for anyone who asks. This particular question went on a while. We're going to even limit members. Let's get this over. You have 1 minute.
I just wanted to ask that the board here has data from Dwight, which I think your children go to, and Burr, and they have flexible grouping.
Same
Which
thing.
I'm, flexible grouping, that I'm asking that this board please look at the data. I know that, I think it's Mr. Hennick that I sat with, or Henkel, he had a whole chart. He graphs each child to see how they've progressed. I'm asking for that data to be presented to the public, to be presented to the board. That's all I'm asking. You have the data. No one's looking at it, or they're hiding it. I don't know. You seem to be looking at data that hasn't been shared with everyone. You've seen it behind the scenes with Dr. Title, but I haven't seen it. So I'm just asking. That's all I'm asking.
Okay, thank you. All right, so going forward, again, 3 minutes for the public, then we're going to go 3 minutes for each member. 3 minutes for the first time. If they want to do a follow-up, they get 2 minutes, okay? Then we're doing a 1 minute follow-up or question from that person. We're not going to exceed, hopefully, 15 minutes in any one question. This was the first one we've gone over 15. Now it really starts. So, who's next? Come on up. Please state your name.
Hi, Carolyn Trabucco, 221 Sherwood Farm Road. My question to you is on the district improvement plan, which I think was kind of the overarching topic of the evening. So, having reviewed it with a slightly different look, the three takeaways that I get from being the amateur in education, but somebody who's used to reading plans, is you're embedding technology, looking to embed technology across all levels, K through 12. Focusing on executive leadership skills for our students, which I take to mean analysis and decision-making. The value isn't any longer based, can you get the information? The value rather is, we are surrounded by information. How do we parse through it? How do we deal with it? How do we drive it to foster better outcomes in our students? The third takeaway I have from this plan is teacher training and teacher resource development. Fostering, we'll call it best practices. Maybe it's keeping up with the times. As I look at those three things, and I rather than try to be the expert in education, try to look at it from how do you manage it. I derive three points. One, from a business standpoint or a management standpoint, we're increasing transparency. The SPIs rather than the KPIs, the student performance indicators and metrics would suggest that. We should be able to find some efficiencies out of all of this, and then hopefully we can derive some effectiveness of the output, effectiveness of the delivery of the product, and then perhaps effectiveness on the cost of how we go about it. My question to you, the board, is had you considered and discussed putting any additional metrics in here that drive to a management number that allow you to make better, more informed decisions about how to manage the district, not just the performance of the students or the cohorts or the subject matter, but trying to identify points of friction, try to work with this fabulous 10,000 student strong district that we have. So to encapsulate that, how do you plan on driving this car, right? You're building something here that's really nice. Now, how do you, as the board, how do you look at it and use it going
30 seconds.
That's it.
Okay. Ms. Cornell, you are first.
I'm going to pass for right
Okay. Who would like to address this? Mr. Dwyer.
Page 15 of the document. The plan has a primary focus of that the performance indicators should measure student performance. And therefore, the 18 or so, plus all the breakdowns, had to fit the criteria that are on that page. And so you're suggesting some management criteria, and perhaps you have one or two or three in mind that you'd want to suggest could be helpful to us to hit the points that you're making. You know, and please feel free to send them in if you don't have them right now on the top of your head.
No, I mean,
Because as part of our discussion at board table, we have talked about should we add this, should we subtract that, and different board members have suggested different criteria that should be considered. And on January 15th, the staff data team will get together to consider all suggestions, so timeliness would be good. June 15th, I'm sorry.
I'd be happy to submit them. I mean, things that jump to mind, you know, if you're trying to look to identify best practices within a district and you have a district as large as ours, you know, does this data come down far enough to help you understand, look at how one school is behaving versus another school is behaving, right? Doesn't mean there are best practices or there are not best practices. You have a demographic profile that fits in there. You have compositions you have to look at. Does this plan encompass kind of a rigor that allows you to say, wow, we may have an issue with such and such, can we go investigate? The other question I might have is, how does this empower, how do you empower, where are the points of empowerment within this plan? So is this to enable the principal to identify, or does this come all the way up just to the superintendent's office and central office? You know, where are the points of influence? Because that's going to be, in my mind, the best way to use this along its timeline. And the plan doesn't speak to that, and it may not have been the point of the district improvement plan. It encompasses a lot. It looks like it can accomplish a lot, and I'm really excited about what it says.
Okay.
But I'm happy to come up with
Okay,
some
so we're going to go back to the members now. Does any final comments?
To your point, there's obviously a significant piece missing from this, which is deliberate because this is the district improvement plan, but the schools have their improvement plans, so that their data is focused on their body of students and their body of data. So that's all part of it, and as we've discussed at the table, and as it is my understanding of that topic, which is that obviously all of these principals are funneling their data to the relevant person here in central office, all of whom are contributing to these data points. But that we're looking at it as a district, because that's what we're looking at. But each school has its own school improvement plan.
And will the schools be able to look at each other's schools?
Those are public,
Okay.
so they'll be on their websites.
Okay. Ms. Lou McCormick?
So those are excellent points, because when we were discussing this, that was one of the questions I asked. For each of these, will it be delineated school by school? I wanted the school by school data to be a pull down, so we'd see the district, but if you pull down, you could see the individual, so that you can highlight just those circumstances. When I asked specifically, would that be included, the response was, I don't know. Then I asked again, so we're not sure, or we haven't decided, and again, I have not heard a differing response. So I'm hoping that at some point that will be clarified to a, yes, of course that will be included, so that the public may see it easily. Because in prior years, the district improvement plans for each of the individual schools were not obviously located. So I would have to Google and search for a while to get each of the schools, which I did compile, but there was a lack of consistency of what each of them necessarily reported, so you couldn't necessarily compare apples and apples, because they're all talking about something necessarily different.
Yeah, but getting it to that point, if I may, getting it to that point,
Make fast, because we want to get the members to
goes through
address.
about 15 different levels to get everyone to agree. I mean, can it be more, is this going to be a living, working plan?
I'd love that to be.
Or is this going to be something that looks great, we file away, and we hope happens?
The whole point of a district plan is to make it so that you can do something with it, and you can make conclusions from it, and you can make an action plan from it. There's nothing more than an action. I would look for an action plan to be derived from the information. You look at it, you analyze it, you draw some conclusions, and then you make some steps to follow up on. That is not necessarily what this is defining. This is defining, I think, what the plan is, but not necessarily the action steps after for the implementation.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So we can ask about that, but I don't know that that's been defined yet.
Mrs. Gerber, you wanted to address this?
Yeah, well, I guess just one thing with the school improvement plans, they are all on the individual school websites, and you don't need to Google them. You just go to the school website, and it's either usually right on the front page of the school, or it's on the under the principal's page. That's usually one of the two places that you can find them. And they're different because the schools have different goals that they're working on. I mean, not every single school is going to have the exact same goals. So I guess that's just something to keep in mind, is that it's not like every single school is going to have the exact same issues that they're dealing with. And each school from plan to plan will have different ideas that they're looking at, different problems that they're working through. So it's not going to be uniform. It's not going to be like a cookie cutter. So that's what I say.
Before we go to, anybody else want to talk here? No. I know, but I want to make sure everyone talks first, has an opportunity if you haven't spoken.
I did.
Thank you. You know, I too agree with some of the points and questions you asked. And when Dr. Title rolled this out, I remember very clearly saying, this is a dream. This is wonderful. But what are we going to do? And he said, great question. I'm glad somebody finally asked that. And one of the things he alluded to was that certain things would have time frames on it, where he feels he can put some timelines on it. Other things are, I think, going to be a consistent work in progress. And that's what he alluded to. And I think that there are things there that can be addressed sooner than later. And hopefully that is a constant work in progress. And we can look at the data. We can look at, okay, we tried to do this year. Did it work? Should we keep going? Do we need to tweak it? So I agree with a lot of it, and hopefully we'll get to build that car.
Thank you. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly?
Just to clarify a point, this isn't something that exists as a hypothetical, and this isn't something that's pretty. We very explicitly asked at our last meeting. I, for example, had one data point which I thought, due to the new high school schedule, I think it might have been enrollment in electives, I thought that the goal wasn't high enough because, well, of course, now that they're taking 8 classes, of course it's going to go up. What happens if we meet the goal in the first year? So a few topics came up like that. So, and then the answer is the important part here, is that this isn't something that the board is wishing and we're hoping someone listens to. The answer from the district was very definitive. This will be looked at each year, and goals will be assessed in terms of, or if we're not making adequate progress, okay, this might just need a second year, see if something kicks in that's now working better, we're on the right track. On the other hand, if by year 2, something's not going well, then this needs to be explicitly addressed. We're not just going to wait for 5 years and then say, yeah, I guess that failed. You know, so that it was very explicit from the district, from central office, that this is a living document that would be revisited probably more than we're even aware of, because it would be done throughout the course of the year, you know, for various topics, but that it would be revisited, adjusted, and, you know, really considered, what are we doing that's not working? What has worked so well? We need to move this bar higher. So that was very direct from central office, that this is not something that's going to be put in a nice little trophy case.
John?
Your points are well taken, and I guess I look at this slightly differently than some of the other board members. You know, I see in here, and I said this last night, you know, we say, okay, it's going to take us 2 years to do this, or 3 years. Which 2 years? Which 3 years? Because there are no interim measurements in here. I had asked to have interim measurements put in, and I see we can wait until 2020. I believe at the prior discussion of this, Mr. Dwyer had said our first time as a board might be 2017 to talk about it, because board members were opposed to bring it back before the wider board for input, for tuning what works and what doesn't work. So the lack of interim metrics, I think, is problematic. The other thing is, we take a look at many of these measurements, and they're all district-wide measurements. Where are the SATs? The kids are required to take those if they want to go on to higher education. Where are the SBACs? The kids are required to take those because the state says so, but they're not in here. So if we're requiring kids to take tests, they should be in here. And if they're not in here, maybe we shouldn't require the kids to take the SBAC. If we don't think it's important enough to track in our district plan, why are we making our kids take it? So I think that we need to put a lot of meat on these bones before it becomes actionable.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you.
Is it for sure?
Next question.
So it's done?
If you could just state your name.
Sure. Tricia Donovan, Fairfield resident. I'm sorry if I repeat themes. I got here late. When I'm looking at this plan, it really doesn't seem like it's fully developed at all. It mentions state mandates, but it doesn't specifically talk about which ones and what progression they're going to follow. We know that we have a new social studies framework that we have to implement next year. We know we have the next generation science standards, which will be adopted by the state possibly later this year for implementation. We know that we have the High School Reform Act, which requires new graduation requirements for the class of 2020. How will that be integrated into this plan? We know that the state is talking about new algebra tests statewide. How are we going to implement that, and when is that supposed to come into play? And will that be one of the indicators that we will be looking at, because that's a statewide test? Like Mr. Llewellyn said, the legislature is talking about getting rid of SBAC for juniors and bringing in the SAT as the mandated test. So I think we really have to look at the SAT, even though there is some sort of affluence factor on that with the classes. I think it's something we still have to consider. We know that research shows GPA is a better indicator for college readiness and success, so maybe that's something we need to put in there. When I look at some of these indicators, what I'm concerned about also is the amount of testing that we're doing in our classrooms. And I think we have to have a serious conversation about how much testing we're doing, especially at the elementary school level. We have district-wide assessments, we have iReady, we have STAR. We do each of those tests about 3 times a year for our students. We know that the STAR test is a nationally normed test, so Why haven't we seen any of those results? When I went on the STAR website the other day, it says it has parent reports that they should be printing out for parents. It has teacher reports. Why are we not seeing any of this? We've been using this for how long? What's going on with that? We should get people used to looking at those. I'm sorry, I have a ton of notes in here. Basically, I don't think this plan is ready to go. It should read like a construction plan, which has different phases of when each initiative is coming into play, and it should, like a waterfall schedule,
You have 1
tell us
minute.
when we're doing things. Thank you. The plan does not read holistically. It looks like a grocery list. We need to look at the plan as an integrated and coherent framework, and it just doesn't read that way. I'm less than happy that every time people want to talk about the plan, it's behind desks. We should all be sitting at one desk with stakeholders, talking in a working session. If you're in a company and you're doing a strategy session, you don't put suggestions in a box. You don't do it through a feedback form. You do it at a working session at a table. And the stakeholders can help the school district decide priorities, because a lot of these priorities have budget impacts. And we should be able to decide as a community where we want our money to go educationally. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there a question you wanted to ask, or just more comments? You got 15 seconds if you want to ask a question.
How is this plan going to become actionable and prioritized? Who's responsible for prioritizing and putting budget dollars to different initiatives?
Thank you. Mrs. Gerber, you are first. You can pass. Okay, so who would like to address this? Dwyer?
Last question first. Dr. Title presents a budget to us that establishes priorities, and then the board debates that in January of each year, and then the town debates it throughout the year till May, and then it comes back to us, as you know, in May, should the town change the budget allocation to us. So the initial budget preparation is done by staff.
Right, but you have a 5-year look.
Let me kind of finish a couple
Okay.
of comments, and then there are some issues that are not in here. SBAC and SAT is one of them, because the legislature, the action that they took, school districts are still trying to determine what action they did take and what impact that has on SAT and SBAC. The intention is once we get direction on that, and a number of the issues that you raised, whether it's the social studies, those things come and we study and implement them once we get direction from the state, rather than try to create something that then has to be redone when we know 6 months from now or a year from now they will be issuing curriculum guidelines. So the plan, I think another point that you mentioned is the plan will be reviewed annually. So if it's adopted this spring or early summer, then a year later, the results of the first year's activity will be presented publicly into the board, and then a review and changes will be made. It is a dynamic document, so I'm not sure that I think that every answer can be found in its original draft.
Right, but if you have a waterfall schedule, and you know in curriculum that you've got standards on social studies coming next year, and we've got, of course, usually curriculum writing teams run us about $40,000. We know that we spend about $60,000 on new textbooks, new resources, depending on how many grades we're covering. We can project that out, not to the penny, but we can certainly look at what we have to build into each budget, because if we're also looking to building in a new K-5 world language program, which would be brand new, how are we going to fit all these initiatives into each budget year? And with the bonding, I mean, we really have to, we can't just look 1 year at a time. We have to really look across the 5 years and how we're going to make all these initiatives fit.
There are other members who'd like to address this. Ms. Maxon Kennelly.
A few points. First of all, with regard to your comment that you have a ton of notes, I think that's exactly what all of us would be very interested in. I mean, this was very much so that this, I believe, will absolutely have impact on our next discussion as we have a reading about this. So if it involves a meeting with any one of us to go over your notes, I know I would be very interested in them. I'm not saying detail them all right now, but I would love to see them. But to some of your specific points, when you talk about the changing science standards, the social studies standards, the High School Reform Act, the new algebra test, what you're pointing out is also the reality of education, which is if we wait till those are done and say, we will now put together our district improvement plan, guess what's happening the next day? Oh, then, by the way, now we're doing this and we're doing that. At some point, we want a district improvement plan. Our other one has expired. You know, then it was held up as we worked on the mission and goals, which we came up with something, you know, very vibrant and very ambitious there as well. And then this was formed from that. But I don't think we can keep waiting. And that's exactly, again, back to Mr. Dwyer's point and to what was explicitly said at our last board meeting. There definitely may be, you know, a new metric line a year from now as something is more definitively known. I will say I have serious problems, huge hesitations regarding SBAC or SAT in any form. Because if you add that as a metric to this plan, you are saying it's something of academic value and that it is something we as a district value. And that's a whole conversation I would want to have seriously before we ever just said, well, it's a test, let's put it in there. There are lots of tests out there. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the one that we want to have representing us or our children. And you also, of course, point out an issue that's nationwide. Parents are talking again and again about testing. Our kids are being tested too much. And yet, what's the next thing out of many of those parents' mouths? I've got an editorial from the Washington Post. It's like, yes, the problem is this test, if you just got the right test. And people aren't realizing their own contradiction, that as they're criticizing one test, the next word out of their mouth is, what test is going to replace that? We just need more tests, better tests,
I think
get
it's
rid
a
of those tests.
Holistic argument
Let's
about
finish.
what
I
is
just want her to finish.
Okay.
So I guess my point is that what is the purpose of the test? What does it test that we value? And that just to keep going, and to your point about the STAR report, I believe, and if anyone on the board can recall this, I know there had been an issue with the form with which it was going to be given to the parents, that it was in a form right now that wasn't working too well or was very legible. I thought that was in relation to the STAR, but I do think that's a good point, that those results do need to get out to parents. But I believe there had been an issue. We'd brought that up before. So, sorry, a slightly convoluted answer there, but
Thanks.
I'd love to see your notes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Llewellyn?
Thank you. One of the issues I find, which I think is what you're alluding to, and what I said before is, you know, we don't have that lattice work that's going to help us get from point A to point B. We've got something that we hope to have voted on and passed at the next meeting, yet I don't see in here any initiatives that are starting the next day. You know, what are our priorities? I see things are going to take 2 and 3 years, but I don't see what's going to occur. And I think in order to be efficient with our time, we need to sit back and prioritize. I've seen strategic plans and district improvement plans from other districts that are very well enumerated and give many steps to take us from point A to point B. The other thing, and I'm going to disagree with Ms. Cannella here again about the SATs and the SBACs, they are not the end-all, or the ACTs, they're not the end-all, be-all, but they are tests that our kids are going to take regardless. And to put them into the metrics requires no work because they're served to us from an outside agency, and the kids are taking them either way. It is one way that we can compare ourselves with other districts to know if we're doing well or we're not doing well. When we rely solely on district testing, what we've lost is our connectivity back out to the rest of the world, the rest of Connecticut, the area that we live in the greater area. You know, how are we actually performing? We really don't know if we disconnect ourselves and stick with the internal tests. And those tests are going to be taken regardless. So to track them, I think, is one of the things we should be doing.
Mrs. Garber, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, well, I guess just one thing in regards to the issue about the costs. I mean, that in this year's budget book, there are costs set aside for the social studies, for curriculum writing, and for science, for purchase resources on new science framework. So I mean, that's already there because, you know, we need to do that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Before you have a follow-up, is there anyone else right now who wants to address this? Okay.
Okay.
If you can have a minute follow-up if you'd like.
Thank you. I know some of those budget numbers are there. What I would like to see is it integrated into the plan so that not only are you looking at short-term, medium-term, long-term priorities and how they're established in the district as priorities, but what kind of money is attached to each of those, so that we know we need to prioritize those things and what we're looking at as a holistic budget. And I think we really need a discussion on testing and what is the value of the different tests. Are the different tests that we give measuring instruction? Are they measuring student achievement? What are they doing? We're giving so many, but they measure different things. So which tests are we putting in here? And which are the important ones to look at? So I think that's a discussion that we really need to have. I know that my kids talk about how much time they spend testing. They came out of the SBAC testing, went right to the iReady testing. So they're sitting all the time in front of a computer screen instead of being in instructional time. And for me, that's a big worry. I would rather have my students or the district concentrate on those tests that are absolutely necessary and use those as our barometers for measuring the district.
That's a minute.
Thank you. I'll give you my other notes.
I know a lot of these subjects we go on and on about, but want to allow time for everybody. So next question or comment? If you just state your name, please.
Oh, but they know me, Jeff.
Okay. You got to do it for the people on TV.
I'm kidding. Trudy Durrell, 64 Woodcrest Road. And I, contrary to lately, will not be talking about renovations and buildings tonight. I'm giving you a break. I did want to bring up that I am a little disappointed in looking over the plan. I wanted to direct your attention to page 26, when you talk about professional learning. Item number 1-16 talks about, it references improving our ability to address a diverse population of students and families, which I applaud. As some of you may or may not know, I am an English as a second language teacher and coordinator in another local school district. So this is something that's close to my heart and that I'm very passionate about. But when you go back to the list of assessments in section 2, not one of those assessments, not one, talks about measuring English language learners and their progress. And there is a state-mandated test. There is Title III federal accountability measures that districts are held to, and there's nothing on here. So if this was intended to be even somewhat comprehensive of an assessment system, you're missing a section of our population particularly related to that 1-16 professional learning on working with students from diverse population and families. So my question is, was that just an oversight? Or is it that the ELL population is so small in Fairfield that it just didn't happen? Part B of that question is, can that be what's the word I'm looking for? Rectified. And C would be, even though it's small, people reference that particular population quite often, usually when they're talking about negative achievement. And if we want to change that mindset, then I think that there needs to be a little bit more in this plan to comprehensively address that particular aspect of the education for those students and families. So I don't know who wants to answer that. But.
So there's a question in there, so whoever wants to go first. Actually, we're going to go down. Phil,
Okay.
you're actually first here.
If the question is, will that be considered, I'll make it my personal business to make sure the data team gets that suggestion on a indicator that will measure the ELL students as it relates to professional development. If you have a suggestion on what you think that
Well, there's a state-mandated
be,
test.
send me an email tonight when you get home so that I can get that passed on to the data team that will meet June 15th. Yeah.
Ms. Gerber, you had your hand up.
Well, I guess my question was just, had you submitted this on the website? Because, there's a district improvement plan on the webpage.
Not
and you
as of
can-
yet. I didn't
Okay,
study it
I was just going to ask,
thoroughly
but it sounds like
prior
Mr.
to
Dwyer's going to do that for you anyway, so you're all set.
I'll forward your email, so please send it to me.
Mr. Convertito.
I think your question and the previous question are perfect examples, going back to the first one. And the question was asked earlier in the evening, is this a living document? And input like that actually helps us to, and the answer is yes, it is a living, changeable document. And, so things like that. Can it be rectified? Yeah, it can be rectified. And it's just, the more eyes that look at it and see it and find things that don't make sense or do make sense, it gives us better input to make it a better plan. So I thank you for your comments. And
Mr. Llewellyn?
Very briefly, I think we should add it as well, because it gets back to what I was saying about the other tests. There are tests that we're mandated to take. They take nothing to add. We should be putting them on our scorecard and tracking them. And while we're on the topic, Ms. Gerber mentioned that, we've got the website. I had actually asked the district to provide to all board members a copy of all of the information that was submitted by parents. So I just want to bring that up again. We haven't received that yet. So I just want to take this opportunity to ask the chair to please get us that ahead of the next meeting. Thank you.
You asked yesterday for it. To date, unfortunately, we have 3 comments, and they're figuring out how to get them printed from the system so that we can distribute them. So as soon as they print them, the board will get them.
So I guess this is a public plea to have people get online and add their comments.
Yeah, no, every public meeting I've been at various places, I have held up this plan and said, please use the website, get your comments in there so that they can be considered. And I think every party that you go to this weekend raise the subject and ask people to send stuff in.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
A couple of points. First, I want to agree with a point Mr. Llewellyn said. I actually don't remember if it was on relation to the last question or to this one, but I just want to put out there that given all the feedback that we're getting, I don't know if we're going to be ready to vote on this next time. We might need that first read, because I think there's a lot that we're going to have to sift through here, and that I don't think that might be acting in too much haste. I'm just going to throw that out there. But one thing to Mrs. Durrell's point, I don't know the size of the ELL population. The one thing I think...
2-point-something%.
Was it that number? I know we'd heard it at some point, I just couldn't remember hearing it recently, that obviously there can be some concern with pulling out that subgroup. I agree with Mr. Llewellyn, if it's a test that we're already given and that it is state mandated. I hadn't been familiar with it. I do think, I'm glad that Mr. Dwyer will be passing that along. I do think that part of the idea had been that we would be capturing some of those students in the free and reduced lunch line, which is a bigger subgroup and has its own focus. But that said, I do think that's a worthwhile point. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Ms. Lou McCormick, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because we had asked that question before, whether there were various student cohorts or subgroups that deserved to be analyzed in more detail rather than just everybody all together in a lump, because as we know, kids have different circumstances, and even the male-female is like a big question that's been debated nationally, and this is a very specific one, as you mentioned. There are a bunch of different student groups that I think the district would benefit from, particularly given the size of our population. It's probably not, in absolute numbers, insignificant. So I would suggest and support the concept of having several student cohorts pulled out and analyzed for, many of the relevant factors that we are assessing here, because I think that makes total sense. It gives better transparency for all of us to see not just the big number, but actually what makes up that big number.
Any other members?
One of the struggles that I think all 9 of us have is right now, while it says 18 student indicators, when you look at schools and when you look at grades and various points, there's a little over 200 data points. Mm-hmm. If you break that down beyond free and reduced lunch to male and female and then other subgroups, it doesn't take long to get to 300, 400, whatever number, and at what point does the ship just die of weight? And I know that's a struggle that the administration has, and I know it's a struggle that we have. How many different data points do you measure? There's no real answer to it, but it is a struggle.
Mr. Llewellyn?
On that point, every student has a student ID. As their information is input, it can be sorted in any which way, and if we can't do that in-house, we should outsource the job so that we can see the proper data. It doesn't necessarily need to sit on this report, but I believe, as Ms. Lou McCormick mentioned at a prior meeting, there can be a click down that gives more insight behind it. I would hope our administration is looking at this at that granular level, so to make it available to the public should be something that can be done. And if we can't do it, we should outsource it.
Yeah, I didn't say that it couldn't be done. This is a question in business, always asking this question. What is your focus? And if your focus is 500 different metrics and data points, then do you really have a focus? And I think that the question is not, can it be done? Because it can. It's a question of what you focus on.
Mrs. McCormick, you had something you want to...
Yeah, and I would say that we do have a lot of metrics, and I would say that it would, I think, behoove us to go through it and actually determine whether all of them are necessary and whether we should be focusing so much on our internal measurements, so much so as maybe emphasizing more the external measures, like you said, a state-required test. I know we don't like the SATs, but unfortunately the SATs are a reality of the world. Kids are being assessed on it. We have to understand what the implication is for our district on a competitive basis. We may not like it. It doesn't really matter. When we assess ourselves, we want to understand our performance relative to the rest of the world. So to me, internal is nice, but really the external should have a priority, and perhaps it behooves us, like I said, to go through these again one more time with a finer comb and determine which ones we really want to focus on, as opposed to all, whatever, 100 of them.
Okay. You can, Trudy, go for one more minute wrap-up.
I'm going to try and do this within the minute.
Okay.
Just while I have your attention. I understand and appreciate what Chairman Dwyer mentioned about the data points. However, when you're talking about ELLs, there is one test and one test only that is specific to them and their growth in language and language proficiency, which is the whole point of having the program, and that is this last links test, which is actually federally mandated and therefore why it is state mandated. And they are part of a subgroup for the other tests, the CMT science, the CAPT science, the SBA, but those are academic tests and they are required to be taken within the first 10 months for math. So a student who may be brand new and here only a week still has to take that math SBA, whether or not they know English. And the ELA test is, at the moment, required in the first 20 months, so the second year, and the state is looking to change that because of the ESEA flexibility waiver that it's putting through, and they may now have to take the ELA within the first 10 months too, and that is a very inaccurate way to get baseline data and growth. The other test is better.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Come on down. No problem. You're not on the clock yet, don't worry.
You're so clock-oriented, it scared me.
Yeah.
I'm Jan Reber of Fairfield. I want to talk about process. It's a good time after Mr. Dwyer's comment that only 4 people responded on the website. I think that may be parent apathy, public apathy. It may also be that we really have not interacted enough with this report. As Mrs. Maxon Keneally has told us now more than once, we're a bunch of amateurs. We really need some guidance. We really have not had an opportunity, I think, to interact with anybody before tonight in any detail about this plan. And I'm really wondering, what is the public role here? What are you going to do with the comments you get from us and from the public? You're going to be voting on this in 2 weeks. How are you going to incorporate our comments? That's my first question.
Do you have others, but get them all out now.
Okay? I like to quote from Stanford's plan. When writing a school improvement plan, the school must not only seek input from the faculty and school district, but also from parents and the community. The Connecticut Department of Education notes in its discussion of strategic planning, none of this is possible without meaningful parental and community engagement. Note the emphasis on meaningful. Do you share that sentiment with Stanford and the state? If so, how have you met it? Since you apparently intend to vote on the final plan in 2 weeks, you don't have a meeting scheduled before then, how can you deliberate and make use of public comment in a meaningful way?
Good, okay. We are now at Mr. Convertito. You can begin this if you'd like.
Sure. First draft of this plan was submitted to us in September?
Yeah.
Okay. Or the first metrics, an outline of the plan was submitted in September, and we've gotten 4 different variations of it since then. That's 6 or 8 months, and I haven't gotten one comment on it. I don't think there's been any public comment on it at the meetings. So when you're talking about the process, you know, we're here, and we called this meeting because we wanted to hear from people because we weren't hearing from people. So, you know, my take on the process is, and I've, you know, now got, I don't know, 4 pages of notes, which I will then review and ask those legitimate questions of the district and the administration, and seek for changes where I think changes are necessary, or the boards think they're necessary. And if we're not ready to vote on it in 2 weeks, we won't vote on it. And that's my take on it.
Jennifer?
First, I'd like to clarify the amateur remark, Ms. Reber, because I wouldn't want you walking out the door thinking I'm just calling a blanket statement of a bunch of amateurs. I was speaking very specifically to the action of planning, preparing, and delivering classroom instruction. And it is on that and that alone that I was making that amateur remark, because otherwise I think that's being a little bit insulting on my part, and that is not, if I came across that way, I apologize. It wasn't intended that way.
I'm very comfortable being an amateur, so.
Okay, well, because I think on a lot of this topic, many of us are amateurs. I've been in education now for 25 years, but I'm an amateur for iReady. I mean, there's plenty in here that we are not, that all of us are having to get up to speed on, and it has been a year-long process or 10-month process. But again, I want to reiterate my point. I agree with Mr. Convertito. I agree with Mr. Llewellyn. I think a vote in 2 weeks is probably going to be too hasty, but unless I think it might. But to your point about Stamford in terms of getting input and meaningful engagement, again, I do believe we have made a sincere effort to do that. A couple of aspects in the plan where I think we are very focused on exactly that. For example, the school climate survey. That was done with a whole series of very targeted questions at staff, parents, and students. And there were some very specific metrics taken off of that school climate survey, which are now factoring into this district improvement plan, as these are measurable points where we want to see improvement. So that was certainly from engaged stakeholders across the district. Another one, which is one of my personal favorite metrics in there, is the high school survey. Now, that's not something that we're getting ahead of time, but that's something we're seeking to do. You students whom we have sought to prepare for career and college readiness, how well did we do, and in what measure? We don't know what that survey will look like yet, because that's going to involve a consultant. But I'm looking forward to that as being very meaningful for future direction. I don't know if it can immediately, I would hope that would be one of the first priorities, quite honestly, because if we got something meaty and meaningful and with enough data in support of it, I'm wondering if it couldn't factor in year 3 of this, as this is something, as a new point of focus, because it was something that that jumped that much to our attention. So, and again, as for how will you incorporate your question, how will you incorporate our comments, I think that's exactly what we are trying to do here, and I certainly appreciate everything that we're hearing from the public.
I can tell you that I've spent some time looking at.
We're going to,
Oh, sorry.
hold on a second. We're going to go to the other members first, because we can't go back and forth. Are there any other members right now who'd like to address this? You got your minute.
Thank you. 60 seconds. Give me the whole 60.
You got it.
I've spent time looking at the district improvement plans at a number of other towns in Connecticut. This plan is different than all of them, I think, in some very negative ways. But one thing is that many of them have a process for involving the public while the plan is being developed. Some have subcommittees on the PTA that have been part of the process, sessions with the data teams where the public is able to interact directly with the people that are creating the data points and so forth. You haven't done any of that. You've given us a draft. We have to kind of go through it on our own. It's unprioritized. I think in many respects, looking at the school climate study, it has ignored a great deal of what's in the school climate study, I think, to its detriment. I mean, I've worked on it and will submit by the 15th for the data plan, maybe 10 pages of questions based on the analysis I've done. It's amateurish. I certainly agree with that. But I think it's indicative, what I found and what you've heard here tonight, that this plan is not ready to go. To vote on it is simply not the thing to do.
We're at a minute.
Thanks.
Perfect.
You're a tough guy.
I gotta let everyone
Thank you.
speak. Thank you. Whoever wants to come down next? I just want to make sure that anyone else who hasn't spoken yet wants to come down.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, how are you? I too have a lot of notes, and I actually have gotten up already once to speak with comments my husband and I last 2 meetings ago, just regarding the district
For the
improvement
record,
plan.
Oh. For the record, so that you can.
I'm sorry,
state your
Kelly
name.
Jacobson, Fairfield resident. And there's a couple themes that have been brought up, and I think, so I found it hard to kind of think about how I wanted to prioritize what I wanted to say tonight, and I think I landed at a good place, and I think it follows some of the other kind of questions and ideas that have been brought up today. And it's also something that I brought up at the meeting that I spoke at. And that's about the fact that parents, I'm a parent in elementary school, we get absolutely nothing shared with us about the performance of our children. And so we do talk about all this testing that's being done, the iReady, the STARS, and absolutely nothing is shared proactively with us. Anecdotally, let me give you an anecdote. We had conferences back in October. It was interesting. We met with teachers. Teachers had the first round of iReady results in their folders. And I heard this from a number of parents. They kind of had them in there, and they were just kind of like, look back. They wouldn't share exactly what was going on. So at the next PTA meeting that we had, I asked our principal what was going on with it. And he said there was some kind of issue with calibration or reporting or something, that, but by certain, the second round of iReady testing, which I believe in January, we would have results in a place where we could proactively share them with parents. We have now gone through 3 rounds of iReady testing at the elementary schools, and I don't think there's one parent out there that has, or one school out there that proactively shares data with parents in a consistent, meaningful way. And I think that's a big issue. I think we talk about this Burr and Dwight model, which I brought up at this last forum, about there being inconsistencies in practice, and perhaps as a board you don't have jurisdiction over managing something like that, but as a board you absolutely have the power to demand that you see these results. These iReady results have been out there, but yet somehow they're under a shroud of secrecy, and I don't get it, and I don't get why this hasn't been raised. And I don't know much about the testing. The testing was new as far as I know. I don't think it was ever brought to you for approval as to why it was being implemented, but it has been. I've researched it. It looks pretty good. And within those results, I think it could tell a picture about how our students are doing. And I guess my question is, first of all, can we implement in this plan some way of saying parents should, the district should require that parents should be delivered results, any testing results that they have for children, proactively. They shouldn't be forced to ask for the test results in a consistent, ongoing way. I think that's important. A district improvement plan rests, so much of our children's development rests with the parents. We need to see this data to know how we can help our parents.
Thanks, Kelly. Is there a 2-second follow-up question?
So I guess I'd love to hear your point of view about what I'm saying about this testing. And is there a way that we can kind of incorporate this into the plan, or just incorporate it very quickly, because a lot of time has passed, and again, we haven't seen anything.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, you're first.
To your point, in terms of parents seeing the results, all I can say is I would be interested in knowing what the holdup is as well, plain and simple. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it, especially once you get out of elementary school. It's a whole nother world, how quickly it falls behind you, and yet obviously we've got thousands of kids who are still there. And so I don't know what that point is. I think we should find that out. In terms of actually implementing some way of saying parents should be given these test results consistently, I'm not sure if the district improvement plan is the place for that. That doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, and I think that was actually a point I'd wanted to make on, I think it was 2 questions ago, there, and Mrs. Gerber, pointed out, science and social studies as being part, this, I'm getting back to your point, are part of this budget. There's going to be a tremendous amount that's going on in this district that's not in this plan. I mean, this plan does not fully encapsulate, if it's not in this plan, we're not doing it. That's not the case. There are going to be plenty of priorities and lots of work that teachers are doing, but it was the decision that these will be the metrics on which we'll base, the assessment of our district's improvement. So to your point, yes, I think that the parents, I know when we rolled out the new progress report, to make sure that parents understood what meet expectations versus exceeds expectations, which was a very different way of looking at that. Okay, when I say new progress report, this might have been 4 or 5 years ago. They had sessions in the school to train the parents in how to view those results. And I would certainly think something, if iReady is something we're going to, stay with, and that it is a worthwhile metric, if there's something that difficult about these results, then that might be something worthwhile for our curriculum leaders to be out in the schools providing that direction to parents. Okay, here's this report, if it's that complicated, helping them to understand it, or can we present it in a form such that they can? A long answer. So the idea absolutely, I think, is worthwhile. I'm not sure if it belongs in the district improvement plan, but it's certainly important.
Thanks. Mr. Llewellyn?
I guess I have concern, too, if we're being told that iReady is not yet calibrated. Some of the board members here have asked for the results of programs that have been implemented several years ago at the elementary level. Haven't seen anything presented in terms of how do those curriculums work, and we're told it's going to be coming, but when we have all 12 years data. I'm also concerned that if the iReady is not calibrated, but it's purchased software, why we're not seeing that. And I think I would challenge the chair to present to the board at the next meeting a presentation on the iReady, what it is, where we are on it, because if we've had it out all year long and parents are asking questions and parents aren't seeing, we're asking students to take tests, yet we're not sharing the results as openly as we should. It's software we're paying for. I'm finding it interesting that it's not generating reports that are legible. So I, too, would be interested in hearing.
Mrs. McCormick?
I've heard several times now, and it kind of concerns me when people keep deferring to, it may not be within the purview of the board to know this or be able to say that. In fact, and the chair can correct me, any educational matter that affects the district can be within the purview of the board should the majority of the board choose to make it a priority. So again, I go back to, of course we can make the iReady available to the parents if the majority of the board chooses that it wants to make it a priority and have it ready. We've made the request several times this year to have it available and to present it. The majority has not at this point acted on it. We will continue to ask. And again, like many of these initiatives, if we want to make leveling a priority and have it implemented, the majority of the board needs only to say, we want to make this a priority, it is going to happen, we want this to happen. So let's not talk about whether it's within the purview of the board. The question is does the majority of the board want to make it a priority of the district to have that happen? And if this board should choose that it wants to have iReady available to parents in September or at the end of this year or what have you, it is within our purview as a board to make these events happen. It just has to become a priority of a majority of this board.
Thanks. Mr. Convertito?
I may have misheard, but I didn't hear anybody say it wasn't in the purview of the board to get the iReady information. I heard it may not be appropriate to be in the district improvement plan, okay? So if I stand corrected, Ms. Connelly, if I misheard you. So I have no problem getting, iReady scores out there and feedback to people, and I think it should be released. So, your question is, yes, it can be done, and we'll work on it. But like Ms. Connelly, I do not believe it's part of the district improvement plan, but it certainly is an issue that we should be discussing.
Other members? Yeah, you can follow up. Yep.
So yes, I'm not sure how much work there really is to do. I mean, I think we can have a discussion and we can see whether the board wishes to move forward on this. Like I said, it's been discussed before. It's an important matter. And I would say along with the iReady, the STAR as well, I think is interesting, as are the SBACs. The kids have spent many, many days. We'd like to see the results, I'm sure, as well. And whether it's a value to have within the district plan, I don't know how long it takes to implement one of these things to be able to generate it. So, no, I do believe that it could qualify to be within a 5-year strategic plan, to say that within 6 months, if we actually have kind of that waterfall concept, within the next first 6 months, presentation and dissemination quarterly, annually, whatever, of these tests, that will fall within that bucket. That could be within our 5-year district plan, and or there could be a rollout. Well, I'm not done yet.
That was not the question
Mr.
that
Convertito,
the member of the public asked.
I'm
Just
I'm
finish.
not done yet.
You can finish your line.
So I think that this could be part of the district plan. I think it's an important issue to raise. It is relevant because the district plan should cover improvement plans from what we do now, and that would be a definite improvement in an initiative. So I appreciate you raising it, and hopefully this will move the board to positively make sure that this happens in the near term.
Mr. Convertito, did you want to follow up? No. Okay. Anyone else? Kelly, you're welcome to.
Okay, yes, and
minute.
so iReady is one. So again, if we're going to give our kids these tests, parents need to see the results. I'm not advocating that we have more tests, we continue with these tests, whatever. They're getting done, we need to see the results. That includes STAR. It also includes, as it relates to the progress report, that there isn't a finalized rubric as far as I understand, and it's not shared. And if there was training done a few years ago when it was implemented, what about all the new families that have since come into the district? And a final point I want to make, we're talking about why there's perhaps a parent apathy as it relates to this plan, and I think it directly relates to this fact that parents don't see anything and they don't really understand the progress of their children outside of progress reports. And I feel like the conversation would be much different if they had more tangible evidence to point to say, hey, my kid's doing okay or they're not doing okay. And I guarantee you, if they had tangible evidence to say, you know what, my relative to every other kid in the country or wherever iReady normalizes to, we weren't doing so hot, you'd see a lot more parents out here, but we're not given anything to even work from. And so,
We're
so
near
I
in the
think
end.
that wraps it up.
Perfect. You wrapped it up nicely.
Thank you.
So we're around 90 minutes now, getting close to 9:30. I just want to have a sense of anybody else want to, by a show of hands, just so we have a. Okay, so probably 2 more questions? No, take your time. Mic is yours. Can you just state your name?
Hi, Christine Vitale, 254 Vernon Hill Road. Hopefully my voice will not give out tonight. I have just a question, just procedures going forward. When this plan is adopted, is this going to take the place of the annual board goals and the district initiatives, the yearly, to-do list that Dr. Title puts out at the beginning of the year? Is that going away, or is that going to be, or is this document basically the only thing that the board and the district is going to be working off of? Do you?
No, that's fine. I just want to give you, if you want to say anything else.
Well, I've sat through these meetings for the year and heard a couple of readings of this plan. And my impression, just from what Dr. Title has said, that he didn't really want to put dates on every item, that it would be visited each year, the beginning of the year, to see what was coming down from the state, what the priorities were for the district at that particular time period, and use this as a guide, but not necessarily say, well, this is September, this is October. And I want to know if I'm right in that assessment or if I'm kind of missing the boat on that, and just hear from you what your expectation is on how the board is going to use this document in planning your goals and what you're expecting from the district annually at the beginning of the year. Just so, from a PTA point, a PTA president, what we can share with parents. Because I've been sharing this all year. First meeting of the year, the missions and goals, it went out talked about it at a PTA meeting. Some of the feedback was, this was a big document for parents who are not attending these meetings to digest. Lost my train of thought there. We also had Dr. Title, just in terms of the communication in bringing this plan to the public. Dr. Title did use the PTAs, met with the PTA presidents, asked us to go back to parents. So it has been brought out there. Board members came to our PTAs to discuss it. I'm not going to say that parents have really been asking a lot of questions, but it has been out there. I would hope that this is not the only time that we're discussing it, that it's something that's going to be a living document and that we're going to be looking at it annually and deciding what the priorities are based on the test that we're giving our kids, being that seems to be changing. 2 weeks ago was the SBAC, now we're looking at SAT. Is SAT the best? More kids need to be taking the ACT. There just seems to be a lot of questions in education right now that I would be hesitant to put
3 minutes.
dates on every line item. And I just wanted to get your feedback and how you see yourself using this.
Thank you.
That wasn't that quick, sorry.
No, that was fine. Mr. Llewellyn, you're first.
Given that the initial question was, are we going to have annual type assessments or goals, I'm going to defer to the chair on that, because you'll probably be one of the folks who's had a conversation with Dr. Title to know what his intent is.
Not specific conversations, but I'll say based on how I listened to his answer to the timeframes, I think you've accurately described his concern is that when we look at our budget, maybe 10% of our budget is within our control, and the other is related to state mandates and contracts and whatnot. And the state does throw a new piece of legislation at us or throw a new mandate at us through regulation of the Department of Education. So reacting to that and then creating the next year's plan based on those changes, I think, is in his mindset. A mission statement drives a strategic plan, and then that strategic plan will drive, I think, 2 other documents that you referenced that will, I suspect, still stay still be used. The school improvement plans will build off of the long-range district improvement plan and relate specifically to the needs of that school. As Mrs. Gerber was outlining, each school will be slightly different. Dr. Title and his central office staff manage the district through an annual district initiatives document that is published each January, and I suspect that will continue as well. So just because we have this as the driving force doesn't mean that we don't have other measurement tools and other documents. As Mrs. Maxon Kennelly mentioned, the items that are in this document will be focused on, but the work of our staff goes far beyond this document because it includes work related to the school improvement plans as well as the district initiatives. So I suspect both will still be in existence. The titles might change and all that stuff, but yes.
Mr. Llewellyn, I'll go back to you to give you
Thank you
time.
very much. I'm actually going to disagree with Chairman Dwyer on the only 10% of our budget's under our control. I think the way we implement our educational system is fully under our control. And if 70%, give or take, is our teaching staff, I think we can shape how we want to provide instruction and how we want to add levels, not add levels. We have the ability to move the needle in any direction we want if we so choose. So I think from that perspective, it's under our control. Back to the comment of no defined dates and things changing all the time, I think without a defined plan, it's going to be hard to accomplish anything. I think we need to have measurements every year, goals and objectives every year.
Well, and I agree with that, and that's, excuse me,
Right.
just...
Let's just finish.
Go ahead,
Let him
go ahead.
finish.
Sorry.
No problem. But I do think we need to have goals and objectives. We need to prioritize. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at everything yet nothing. That's the risk we run.
Okay, before we go back to your comment, anyone else, Mrs. Kennelly?
To Mr. Llewellyn's point, just because this, at in this existing draft right now doesn't stipulate priorities, doesn't mean we're everywhere and nowhere. Dr. Title was very clear, we are not doing all of these simultaneously. That was very clear up front. I think it might be interesting if, while I do not require that listing out for the 5 years, the same reason that I, quite frankly, am not a big fan of the pacing guides that come with our curriculum, which I think reduce certain teacher flexibility. I wouldn't want this to come with its own pacing guide either. As Mr. Dwyer references, we've got state mandates that could tweak things, but I do think it might be valuable, for example, if we ask Dr. Title if we could have a sample of what might the year 1 priorities be, so we get a sense of the scope of this is what we focused on. I would disagree about then saying, okay, everything needs a date slapped on it within the plan. I disagree with that, but maybe seeing a sample of year 1 would be helpful for everyone who's interested in, okay, can we get a better sense of this? I don't, for a second, I'm not operating on the thought that it's everything, which I completely agree with you. That's why I'm not in favor of this continuous adding of more and more metrics, because if you're putting the metric in there, you're telling the teachers, this is important, we want to be measured by this, which is my big problem with the SAT, where the research is very clear on the explicit teaching of test-taking strategies improves SAT scores, and that is not where I want our teachers focusing. Side note, I had to work that in. But just to the point of the baseline line, that maybe it would be helpful to have a year 1 sample. But I wouldn't look to have everything within the plan have those same dates on it, because I would like there to be some flexibility for the staff in that regard.
Mr. Convertito?
I think your first question was, would this document supplant the board and annual goals and initiatives and so forth? Is that your first question?
Well,
Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
I think that I agree with Mr. Lamb and what Ms. Maxon-Canelli said. I would like to see some sort of broader pacing guide of when you see certain things happening. And I would imagine it would flow into the goals that you set at the beginning of the year, that it wouldn't necessarily replace what you're doing, because we're still doing curriculum, there's still other things that are going on, and it's really just kind of trying to see what all the pieces are going to be and where the focus is going to be, given that there are so few board meetings and time is precious, and just how you're going to manage this document, existing documents, and planning moving forward now that we have, once it's approved, a 5-year plan. And in looking at other district strategic plans, I think some of them are beautiful. They're written by a communications department. I think it's also important to look and see the end result. I mean, a plan is only as good as, does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do?
Mr. Convertito?
Okay, so my take on this document is it's a 5-year document, okay? I would anticipate that the board annually would look at the document and say, where are we? What are we doing next? And I would like to see some pacing structure in there before we approve it, so that we know 18 months from now we're starting this or and so forth, and this is the data we're collecting and so forth. Will it supplant board goal setting and policies? No, because this will sort of be a backdrop to everything that we do. That's my view and take on it as a board member, is we're taking this initiative to get the program that we have now at a higher level. That's in place. What's in front of the board as far as goal setting and so forth is additional things. Some of it may come from here, some of it may not, okay? So to me, it's a mix. This is not the end all. It doesn't abrogate the board from its responsibilities and moving forward. So I look at this as an addition to what we're doing, not supplanting any of our responsibilities that we currently have. So
Mrs. Garber?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch, Mrs. Vitale just brought up something that I just think is important to remember in terms of, plans looking great on paper, but how they're implemented is the really important part, because I know there was a lot of talk about how Greenwich had a really great strategic plan, and how that we didn't have a plan at the time because we were waiting for the mission and goals to be done, but that Greenwich was something that we should be striving for. Greenwich was quoted. And I actually spoke to the chair of the Greenwich Board of Education, because she contacted Fairfield to get information about strategic planning, because they were working on a strategic plan. And I said, oh, well, you have a strategic plan? And she said, we do. And I said, yes, it's on your website. And she said, oh, well, learn something new every day, and kind of laughed. So just something to keep in mind, that I just want to say that.
Well, and I would not want that to happen to our strategic plan. I would not want.
No,
to
and
be-
I wouldn't either.
Mr. Patton.
I'll just echo with what Mr. Convertito said, and in terms of things like whether it's every year or every other year, whatever the board overall decides, is certainly, we can choose to have board goals for a year or a couple of years or not, and this, getting this plan created and put into action was this year's major goal. And so we're, 70, 80% there. We've just got to get the plan finalized to the point where we can at least let the first test run go. I mean, we could sit here and we could tweak it forever. And while I may agree, yes, it sounds like we might need the data team to look at all these changes and input from tonight and one more go around at the next meeting before we actually vote on it. But certainly we want it in place by the fall so we can have all these things to measure. And whether it's this test or that test, you've got to start somewhere. And, if it turns out that certain information isn't working and we have a couple of years of data and we're like, well, that doesn't really tell us anything, then we're going to change it. Dr. Title has told us that, over and over again. And there hasn't been a comprehensive plan like this, with all this data. There's been plans, but not hard data like this, or at least attempt to create a plan with hard data like this that's used in recent history. So I hope that, it goes through, and I look forward to all the changes and all the information that comes up. I mean, certainly when we did the testing for SBAC, and Fairfield was one of the testing districts, a year ago, we were saying, well, if we're going to be a testing district, why can't we get the testing data from our test year with the first year this year? And, we still don't have a definitive answer on that, but, you've got to, ground zero has to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. This is ground zero. And hopefully 3 years from now, we'll be in a much better place, and we'll have a much better indication of where we want to go. And sessions like this are great. The input is great. And again, I'll please implore you, TV land, any 20 people out there watching, go on the website and send your comments in, because they are being read and they are being looked at.
Ms. McCormick?
So to your question about will this replace the board's goals or the improvement plan, how will this be implemented exactly? I think that's what you're asking.
I just want to know, really philosophically, how you're going to be using this
Right.
in, what you're moving forward, what you want to see this board do, where you want to see this district go. And there might be different expectations. I think it's important just for everyone to somewhat have the same expectation of how you're going to use this, or I could just be there a lot of disagreement.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And as you can see, the process has not been clearly defined yet. I think that's it. It has not been discussed. It hasn't been defined yet, the process. We made an attempt at the very beginning of this year via the bylaws to integrate and create a process for when you would review things, have a frequency, have an action plan that would be reviewed annually, blah, blah, blah. The board chose not to want to define it. We did not want to have a process at that point. But you have to understand, by leaving it this way, then it will be determined by the board every year. So one year it may decide that it wants to integrate the 5-year strategic plan as one of its board goals or priorities and prioritize them. In another year, it may say, nah, not so much. We're not going to really think about that this year. Maybe the next 2 years, we don't care. Maybe the new board might say, we really want to do this for a year or two, and then they might say no. So unless there is a process that is clearly defined and that everyone is consistently implementing, really the answer is, it depends. It depends who's on the board. It depends what that board wants to do that year, what that superintendent wants to do that year. The answer is, it depends. So it's very difficult for us to answer because it's not been determined.
So we're at 17 minutes. If you want to take I'll give you 1 minute to wrap up if you'd like, but we got to go to the last question.
No, it's fine.
Sure?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. I just really.
All right. I think we had one more. You are the final one. Last but not least.
Save the best for last.
That's right.
Oh, wow, I didn't even get a laugh.
I laughed inside.
Wow.
I did.
I think I overstayed last night. Suzanne Miska, 123 Reigate Road. Couple things. We did have a strategic plan. It ended in 2015. We don't really know how well or how poorly it did. So it's nice that we've got a new one. I'm hoping that this new one we're going to actually do something with. And I guess that's where these performance matrices are coming into account. My first concern with this is in all respect, and I say this with respect to Mr. Convertito, at the last meeting, there were many parents who did speak out on this item, but I believe that you weren't there, so that's probably why you didn't hear that the parents had to say. Second, I do have a problem that parents are asked kind of this at hand's length kind of response. If you could please go on the website, type in what it is you want to type in. And as a parent, you sit there and you type. I've typed in every time there's a curriculum up, and I take the time and I research it and I type it in. And I'm curious, one of my questions to you is, do you ever see that? Because chances are I start to feel as a parent that I'm typing all these wonderful things and things that I feel you all should know so much about what I have to say, and you're probably not getting them. The other thing is communication. We've worked really hard to kind of put parents like this. There's like this wall, and while I appreciate that we've all had our chance to kind of go over bylaws, et cetera, there needs to be the ability for parents to be heard, whether it's at a PTA meeting. This show once every 2 weeks, although, it takes a lot of guts for a lot of people to get up here to do our 3 minutes of complaining or accepting or applauding. We've lost something in the last 5 years. We used to have, when my son was in elementary school, the superintendent would come and have a question and answer session with parents. We don't do that anymore. We used to have, I know we still do the brown bag lunch, but the superintendent also used to come to the schools during budget season to hear the questions from the parents, to engage the parents in this kind of repertoire, so that parents, don't have to come just here to hear what's on an agenda item. In fairness, with this district improvement plan, my concern is it kind of came out in little pieces, because in fairness, when everyone said it took 10 months, I couldn't understand how we got 10 months, because mine stamped May 19th. But I get it. We saw it over a period of time. The one question I have that's on the district
30
improvement
seconds.
plan is there are budget implications in many of these things, including the alternative high school. And what I would like to do is get a feel for is there going to be a requirement of a feasibility study? Because what I tend to find here with the board in relation to the administration is that once you guys approve something, it's used that it was approved, therefore there is no discussion on it. And so my question is this thing going to actually be allowed to be brought forth? And why did the board and the district decide not to roll this through the PTAs and get the PTAs involved in this discussion?
Okay. So we've already gone around, so firsthand gets this question first.
Oh, come on.
Would anyone like to address this? Mr. Patton, go for it.
I'm just going to take a quick stab at your last point, which was why do we not roll this out through the PTAs? And I believe, at least at the North Stratfield PTA meetings, I don't remember if it was the budget reps or not. I wasn't there in an official capacity, but it was brought up and mentioned and discussed twice, so mostly in the spring. So.
But, I mean, why didn't Board of Ed members or the superintendent decide to do the pony show on this? Why not get the conversation going in the district? I don't know how you guys take it, but I'm sensing we've got a parent population out there who thinks they don't have a say, who thinks they don't have any involvement in what you nine are doing and the person who's in that chair. And I want to know what we're going to do to make it better. And I don't know that this district improvement plan does it. There's a lot of words about communication. We're going to improve communication. I see it on every school improvement plan. It's very nice to have school improvement plans on websites. I'd like somebody to tell me what you're going to do with it.
Mr. Patton, do you want to finish?
No. No.
Okay. Would anyone, okay.
I'll defer to any other board member first.
Ms. Kennelly.
Thank you, Ms. Maxon Kennelly.
I was not going to leave you hanging on that one. So in terms of why the boards didn't get PTAs involved, I know, here's one thing that I would say. I think a genuine effort was made. And in that, we find with a lot of things like Infinite Campus, et cetera, where we're deferring to technology more and more. And I'll be honest with you, I'm convinced, and I know the data does not fully support this, but something like the topic of PTA memberships often being down, I can't help but think part of that is because it's all online and I'm not getting that piece of paper anymore. And so I recognize that, okay, please go on the website and do this, but there's nothing quite like, pardon me, Mr. Llewellyn, having this in your hand to go over it. And so I think, one, I think we just got a little mini metric of our own, which is it just doesn't work. I think a sincere effort was made. I know I went out to multiple PTAs and I brought it up. I will find that there were a lot of other topics I brought up, like the allergy policy, that got a lot more discussion. The district improvement plan did not. And whether it's, I can't conjecture, I won't try to guess at a reason, whether it's because people don't want to read it online, whether because it falls into the realm of people just wanting to trust administration to do this, that's what we pay them for. I'm not going to guess at the mindset. I know that when we have curriculum review, we don't have huge turnout on something like that, something that we think which is very fundamental, and that's, I mean, there will be a PTA blast. Anyone interested in the world language focus group, come and talk to the people doing the curriculum. Mrs. Lou McCormick can speak to that. 4, 5, Mrs. Gerber, you went to one also, or you were going to? I mean, I don't know if you if you need 2 hands to count how many are coming. And I'm not faulting parents for that at all. No. Between busy lives or how we're doing this, so again, I wrote down your questions. So why didn't the board get PTA involved? I think a sincere effort was made. I don't think it got the results that we may have wanted. And so in future endeavors, another way needs to be found. And this is some pretty compelling data that this wasn't the way to reach out to parents. But I would disagree with the idea that the attempt wasn't made. You also asked the question, is there a feasibility study regarding the budget impact? Part of my head, I didn't think that there was. I think that's part of where we will be going. We know that it's there. We know that we have this district improvement plan. We know that, for example, if Dr. Title gives us, because I do think it would be very good for us to see as a sample of year 1, that way we're going to have a heads up very early on for the budget cycle, for the, that the board will know these are some priorities, let's not lose track of them. Of course, keeping in mind also that there is the world language curriculum that's going to involve some money. But the idea of, I've been a part of a feasibility study, and that can take a great deal of time. I'm not saying it can't be time well spent. I'm not sure that it's needed for this because so much of this can roll ahead without budget implications. We're already giving these tests. Let's start getting these as established and getting those annual reports.
Hey, Jennifer, I think your time's down.
Your first point, I'm not positive what the question was.
There probably wasn't one in there. It was more more a statement. It's okay. Thank you.
Ms. McCormick?
So I think there is improvement for communication, I mean, clearly, and maybe there was some sort of an effort, but even when I did attend the curriculum review, you have to understand, I was not invited to it, nor was I notified that the event was occurring. So a lot of the events that go on within the district, they happen on their schedule, and I think we could do a better job of notifying parents. I think we could do a better job of notifying board members that these events are happening. When I went to text reviews, when I went to curriculum reviews, it was rarely that I was proactively notified. Usually it's a parent whispering to me that this is happening. Do you want to come? And to me, that's a concern. I'm a board member and I don't even know these are happening, and I would go if I knew. And if I ask, of course the answer is, of course I'll tell you, but that could be 6 months down the road and people forget. So until we make it part of our process and it becomes part of our culture to be inclusive of board members, of parents, of the community, and we're open to criticism. A lot of people don't like criticism, and it's very hard to take. It is very hard to take. But to me, we can't get better unless we are open to it and we realize that it's not something against us. It is something that improves us and brings us to a better place once we address it. And I think that this district does so many things wonderfully, but you're right, communication is one thing that I think We continually acknowledge that we have to do better, and yet actually doing something has been an incredible challenge for us. And maybe it's because we hate to acknowledge that, in fact, we really do have a communications problem. And then, in fact, people step back and they close down even more because they don't want to show it. But either way, I agree with you. The thing is that we need, again, I'll go back, if we want to do something, this board has the power to do it. If you have a great recommendation on what you think we could do to fix it, I would suggest that you share it with us and we can take action. If we want to take action, this board has the power to take action. Of course, you need the majority of the board to want to take action. That's the key. In terms of the feasibility study, well, you made reference to the alternative school. So let me just jump on that for a second. My understanding is that if we approve this, then we are basically putting the rubber stamp of saying, yeah, we agree that we're going to grow and invest in that alternative school, and we're going to try to attract people to make it so good that people from all over the state are going to come to Fairfield to go to this awesome alternative school, right? Via our 5-year district plan. I don't know if that was the intention. That was what was implied, but you know what? We haven't had a discussion on each of these bullet points in enough detail at this point for me to even answer you what the detail is behind each of these comments. And so again, the communication, even between us, can be improved. I think we need to have further discussion. There's a lot of detail, and I think there's a lot of implication that's attached to something so big and large and significant as this 5-year strategic plan, because within each of these lines, there's a lot of stuff that's attached to it, and we haven't really discussed any of them in detail. We kind of covered them in bulk. And I would look to this board to say, we need to discuss each of these in detail before we can really charge forward and move forward, and we need to prioritize these. You can't just attack 71 items and just say, oh, we'll review it in a year, in 40 minutes.
We're at time.
I don't think so.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to comment on 2 of your comments, or respond to 2 of your comments. You asked the question about the parent involvement or the lack thereof, and you've got to come back and ask yourself the question, is there a lack of involvement because the involvement adds or is incorporated or is taken into consideration, or comments are taken into consideration, or do you feel as though you're speaking and not being heard? And I guess if people are speaking and not being heard, that could account for the decline in folks participating in things. And I guess what will really be interesting is we've heard a lot of comments here, and a lot of them have been along the same lines. And it'll be interesting to see 2 weeks from now how many of these comments are actually pushed back into the improvement plan, because there were a lot of really common themes here that were the same common themes that were brought up at the last open forum that we had called a couple months ago. So let's see if the feedback is taken, because I think it should be. The second comment you made, which Ms. Lou McCormick just addressed, is the feasibility study. And you did bring up the alternative high school. I'd questioned that the first time we had a reading. And then the language was struck to just be kind of best in class. But then after a little debate, when we said, let's just remove the bullet point, it was brought out that, no, it's here because we're going to do this. So once again, I think we need to challenge the administration to say, explicitly state it, or it doesn't exist. I don't think we should have anything kind of embedded behind words. If we plan to build something, I think it needs to be explicitly stated in here, because it's been deleted. So because it's been deleted in the words, the words are what survive, unfortunately or fortunately. So I think we need to have it explicitly stated, and I completely agree we should be investing in no new projects like that without understanding what we have to start with. Does it work? Does it not work? What does it cost to improve? I think we need to improve it. Do we need to improve it to the point where we need to roll it out statewide or nationwide? Yeah, no, I'm not sure. Dr. Title did say he thought there was room for improvement. If that's the case, I don't think we're going to turn anything that quickly that we're going to be best in class and opening it up to taking residents from other towns. And I certainly would want that explicitly laid out in here as opposed to embedded, like some of our learning.
Other members? Before you go, Jennifer, any other members that haven't spoken on this? Okay, I'll get.
Okay. Several points. I want to reiterate a point I said, which Mrs. Lou McCormick then changed, and I want to reiterate my point. Not that there is not communication, which is what was alluded to. I absolutely think an attempt has been made at communication. I think it's not always working that well. And I think that that would be a valuable point to look at. But Infinite Campus was a way to try to make it more widespread, to reach all parents. Do I think it is always the most accessible way? Not necessarily. Do I think it is the most efficient? It's certainly an efficient way. But I don't know that it's achieved the communication result. But to say that the attempt has not been made, that we just talk about it and don't do it, I think is completely false. Second point, the phrase was used that we rubber stamp an alternative high school. We haven't rubber stamped anything. We had an extensive conversation and made a budgetary commitment to a new administrator there. We are investing in the school. We are seeking to make it a better educational environment. It is good right now. It can be better, and it is serving a segment of the population that we could very well be paying for one way or the other, and better to be proactive and truly serve these children and truly give them an education and turn them on a different path that traditional education is not working for them. So that is not something that we've rubber stamped. That is something that we as a board made a financial commitment to, which goes into the next point of, in terms of it appearing in the plan, board members objected to the wording in there, rightfully so. It was premature. The wording was removed. I disagree with Mr. Llewellyn's take on that. I didn't hear it from the staff members that they were then seeking, well, it's still in there, we're still looking to make this a statewide, drawing point and a revenue source. My take on the comment had been, and perhaps I'm wrong, and I'd want to go back to the tape and see it, was that the commitment was to improving the school. And even to have as part of our verbiage that we're looking to make something an educational beacon, well, isn't that actually what the conversation about the SAT scores is saying? The exact same thing. We want to be an educational beacon. We want Fairfield to be a district that people look to as a model. So to look at on the micro level at areas within that as being beacons, well, of course that's something we should be striving for. But we have, in fact, made a commitment to that with that new administrator, and I look forward to seeing how that pays off for the district and how those children are then better served.
Great. Sure. One follow-up. Go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Just in response to the last comment, I'll get you the audio if you'd like, in terms of the fact that it's there. And it was in response to Ms. Lou McCormick's comment that we should just strike 2.6, and that's kind of when it all kind of came out. I do agree that we do need to improve that school. There's a difference between improving it and making it a beacon and expanding it to the point where we're going to then take in folks from other districts without actually having seen it walk, let alone run. And then in terms of adding an administrator, and the investment, the debate that occurred, if you'll recall, as part of that debate, a teaching position was cut for the benefit of an administrative position. So, are we focusing on the education or are we focusing on the administration? I'm not sure.
Quick reply?
Quick.
When you are looking at the social emotional development of a child, if you don't address that, which you can do by a leader who is in touch with all components of a student's education, you are reaching that child. A teacher alone in a classroom is doing a tremendous job, but you need leadership as well, and this is a population that especially needs that.
Okay, we're going to wrap up. We're going to give you a sort of 1 minute to finalize anything you want to say, and then we're going to call it a day.
Okay. The point I'm trying to make is that this board has wanted to be part of the budget discussion for a very long time, and we never seem to make progress on that. You now have in front of you a district improvement plan, and my concern is this. We have a tendency to do what we do with the 5-year facilities plan. Well, this board passed this facilities plan, therefore we need to do what's next on the list. I watched this budget season for probably the 11th time that I've done it, and I've watched where things get presented, like the alternative high school and administrators, or world language, and it's this last minute, hi, this is how much it costs, we'll tell you all about it later, and you really need to we really want it, and if you just trust us and put that money in there, when we come back, we'll tell you all about it. In my view, as a taxpayer and a parent, I would like that a little bit earlier in the session. I would like you guys to have this discussion. If it is about world language, let's give me a summary, give me a synopsis. If it is we need to administrators at alternative high schools, let's discuss what that really means before it's just a number on a page, and then it becomes, well, you struck that number or you didn't keep that number. Let's put a face with what these things are, and if this plan is going to tie to that budget, then I'm hoping that at some point we can get this board and the administration on the same page, having that discussion of if these are new curriculums or these are new programs. For example, you've got in your budget social studies curriculum, you've paid for it, we don't know what it is. And in the form of being on curriculum committees, in all due respect, I did sit on the LA curriculum committee, and with, I don't know that I'm going to volunteer again, and let me explain why.
Make it quick, Suzanne, we're going to wrap up.
Okay. It was made very clear I'm not an administrator or an educator, and I'm not. I'm a parent. I bring a different set of skills than maybe somebody else does. Second, the curriculum was already developed, and it was, would you please look at this and read it, and then you can tell us what you think about it, but you will have no input nor involvement in this. Just tell us if you like it or you didn't like it. And then the next thing I know is my name's on a PowerPoint spreadsheet saying that I was part of this curriculum committee, but honestly, I left there going, nobody really cared what we had to say at all, because the things we wanted to see in there or suggested there be changes to weren't even, they were politely listened to, but I don't know that they were utilized. Not that maybe any of them should be, but it would be nice to feel that you were part of the process, not just coming in at the end result.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Sorry to be so strict on time, but it took us over 2 hours to go through 10 questions, so that's why we had to speed it along. Okay, well, I'm used to faster, so if I upset the dynamics, I'm sorry. Do you want to conclude anything, Mr. Dwyer? Or?
I'll only say on behalf of the board, I thank, what I counted was about 37 people in total who came to our meeting. I'll be in touch with our state legislators, and I'll ask them how many they pulled out, and then when they tell me the number, I'm going to tell them one more than that number. No, I'm very appreciative that we had almost the same number, if a little bit more, than we did the first session. And so you have choices to make. You can stay home with your family. You can go to other places. You could have gone to the legislative meeting. So I very much, and the board very much appreciate your attendance tonight. Thank you.
And a thank you also to our moderator, please.
Okay, for the audience, should we thank the moderator for the time? Job he did? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that memory. And we are adjourned? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Everything you expected, just like the arcade? A little more heated.